Oh my, she's sleeping so soundly. My mother-in-law murmured to my daughter who was dozing off in the back seat, as she parked the car in the outlet mall parking lot. When she turned off the engine, the air conditioning went off too, and the temperature inside the car soared under the scorching sun. My daughter's face turned red, and sweat started to bead on her forehead. Observing this, she gave a creepy grin, stepped out of the car alone, locked it, and went shopping. My name is Olivia, a 31-year-old office worker. I live with my husband Matthew, our daughter Emma, and my in-laws. My in-laws are my quiet father-in-law, James, and my cantankerous mother-in-law Linda. When we got married, my husband mentioned that he wanted us to live with his parents. His father has mobility issues and requires regular medical visits. Since my mother-in-law is not comfortable driving, my husband has been supporting them by living at their house. I deeply respect my kind-hearted husband. Having grown up with my paternal grandparents, I had no qualms about living in a 3-generation household. However, 5 years ago, when we started living with my in-laws, I realized my assumptions were naive. My mother-in-law is incredibly short-tempered and extremely stingy. She secretly harassed me, earning her the nickname, the Wicked Mother-in-law. She was nothing like my grandmother, with whom I had a harmonious relationship. While I don't know how she treated her daughter-in-law behind closed doors, my grandmother and my mother seemed to get along well. Consequently, I couldn't fathom the real-life battles between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law seen on TV. I used to think, almost as if it were someone else's problem, that there are people going through difficult times. But living with my in-laws shattered my preconceptions. The harassment from my mother-in-law began on day 1. She declared, "Since you've stepped into our home, you'll follow all our customs." As a result, I was burdened with all household chores, including preparing meals for my in-laws, cleaning the entire house, providing transportation for hospital visits and outings, and having good relationships with neighbors. Any deviation from my mother-in-law's wishes resulted in later complaints. Desperate to please her, I closely observed her methods and mimicked them. Whenever I tried to enjoy my free time, she would hover behind me, monitoring my every move. My husband, unaware of her true nature, often praised our harmonious relationship. "It's wonderful how well you and Olivia get along," he'd say. We'd both respond with forced smiles. My frequent interactions with neighbors, as per my mother-in-law's orders, led to an increase in acquaintances. Sympathetic neighbors would say, "Isn't your mother-in-law strict and difficult?" Apparently, her wickedness was well known in the neighborhood. Rumor had it that my husband's previous girlfriends had also faced her harassment. Despite being handsome and kind, my husband's undesirable mother made him less appealing to other women. As someone who hadn't known these circumstances, I felt uneasy when I first heard about them. But my father-in-law treated me well, and the real issue was my mother-in-law. If I could endure her harassment, perhaps we could maintain a peaceful life, or so I thought. Her harassment escalated when my pregnancy was confirmed. Initially, she seemed happy when I shared the news, but the moment she learned it was a girl, her expression turned blatantly disapproving. She said, "Having a girl means she'll eventually leave. She's not worth raising. Quickly, have a boy." I retorted, "Every child born is precious. Besides, we're not obligated to pass on the family business, right? So there's no need to fixate on having a boy." In response, my mother-in-law continued, "Our family has been landowners for generations. Our surname is special. I won't allow our lineage to break because of you." She huffed indignantly. Honestly, I didn't marry for social status. My husband wasn't concerned about having an heir. In fact, knowing we were having a girl, he eagerly anticipated our daughter's arrival, thinking of toys and celebrating her birth. To him, she was the long-awaited girl. While my mother-in-law grumbled about our daughter, she never directly begged my husband for a son, only when we were alone. In secret, she insisted I produce a son. Her attitude persisted even after our daughter was born. In front of my husband and father-in-law, she doted on our daughter, but when our daughter sought comfort from her, especially on bad days, my mother-in-law would coldly push her away. It was clear she didn't genuinely care for our daughter. "Grandma is scary. As our daughter grew and began speaking, she started avoiding my mother-in-law. One day, my husband noticed this behavior and confronted his mother. "Emma seems afraid of you. You're not treating her poorly, are you?" Panicked at being exposed, my mother-in-law changed her approach. From then on, she actively took our daughter to the park and cared for her at home. However, her harassment toward me intensified. I had grown accustomed to her petty remarks and no longer felt hurt by them. Most importantly, her improved behavior toward our daughter put my mind at ease. As our daughter gradually warmed up to her, I decided to return to work. My husband adjusted his schedule, allowing our daughter to stay with my mother-in-law for a few hours during weekdays. Surprisingly, my father-in-law was thrilled to look after our daughter. Perhaps he influenced my mother-in-law, who reluctantly agreed to care for our daughter. One weekend, an emergency situation arose at work, and I was ordered to work on my day off. Starting now? Understood. I'll head there right away. As I anxiously spoke into the phone, my mother-in-law must have sensed that it was a call from my workplace. She gave me a stern look. My husband had already gone to work, having swapped shifts with a colleague that day. My father-in-law had left early to attend his mentor's son's wedding. I considered finding a temporary place to leave my daughter, Emma, but doing so on the same day seemed impossible. Leaving Emma alone at home for an extended period isn't an option. I need my mother-in-law to look after her, I thought to myself. Just then, my mother-in-law abruptly addressed me. "Don't worry. I'll take Emma to the outlet mall. You go to work. Grandma, let's go." My daughter was overjoyed. I hadn't expected my mother-in-law to volunteer to take care of Emma, so I was pleasantly surprised. After thanking her repeatedly, I reminded Emma to listen to her grandmother. I hurriedly made my way to the office. However, that afternoon, I received an unbelievable phone call. It was the police. He said in a reassuring tone. "Please stay calm. We've taken care of your daughter." Unexpectedly, Emma had been trapped inside a car, but someone found her and rescued her. "Please come to the outlet mall's office immediately." What's going on? If she's being protected, Emma must be safe. I regained my composure and tried to understand the situation. What's she doing now? I couldn't reach my mother-in-law, she wasn't answering her phone. Upon arriving at the outlet mall, I headed for the employee entrance. After explaining the situation to the security guard, I was allowed inside. In a room, several police officers stood around a pipe chair, where my little daughter sat. Emma noticed me and jumped off the chair, running toward me. "Mom." She had been anxious, surrounded by unfamiliar adults, and was crying uncontrollably. Meanwhile, I held her tightly, relieved to see her safe. Although it wasn't midsummer, the direct sunlight was scorching. Children's body temperatures are higher than adults, and leaving Emma in the car was unthinkable. If no one had found her, Emma would have been in serious trouble. Imagining the worst, I trembled. I hugged Emma once more. Despite repeatedly calling my mother-in-law, there was still no response. I need to hear the details from her directly, I thought, suspicious of her. I explained to the police that my mother-in-law had been looking after Emma. However, when Emma was discovered, my mother-in-law was nowhere to be found. I became convinced that my mother-in-law intentionally left Emma in the car. Emma couldn't unbuckle her seatbelt or open the car door by herself. If someone hadn't helped her, Emma would have been in serious danger. My anger toward my mother-in-law flared up again. Was she still inside the mall? Let's search the entire store. If we don't find her, we'll head home, I decided. To keep Emma entertained, I bought her juice while we continued our search. The police officer also offered to help, so I thanked them and left the room. Glancing at my phone, I noticed a reply to the email I'd sent my husband 30 minutes earlier. Despite its many mistakes and half-coherent content, it was clear that my husband was quite upset. In my email, I conveyed that our daughter was safe, explained that I would search for my mother-in-law, and requested that he wait at home after work. I didn't want our daughter to see us both upset. For now, I would focus on finding my mother-in-law. We wandered through the store, Emma growing bored. Meanwhile, my shopping-loving mother-in-law disliked driving herself and frequently invited me to accompany her, often on the same day. She would spontaneously decide to go out, causing me to rearrange my existing plans. However, my mother-in-law never expressed an ounce of gratitude for my efforts to adjust my schedule. Oblivious to my concerns, she enjoyed shopping at her own pace. On days like today, when my husband and father-in-law were absent, our daughter joined us. The outlet mall, with its many temptations, became a playground for her whims. Buy this. Buy that. Her demands escalated. Despite having experienced parenthood herself, my mother-in-law seemed baffled by our daughter's behavior. She watched me struggle with a crying child, yet continued shopping at her leisure for 2 or 3 hours. Frustrated by her selfishness, I considered leaving her behind. But then, my mother-in-law exclaimed, "My daughter-in-law abandoned me." She tearfully appealed to the security guard nearby. Although this incident was in the past, recalling it still irritated me. This same self-centered mother-in-law had put our daughter in harm's way today. I can't stay silent about this. I must find my mother-in-law. Determined, I scrutinized the faces of passers-by. Suddenly, our daughter pointed and shouted, "There's Grandma." I turned to see my mother-in-law, who appeared surprised by my sudden movement. She let out an awkward sound and swiftly changed direction, running away. "Wait, Linda." She headed toward the parking lot, and I chased after her. Fortunately, the weekend outlet mall was bustling with people, making it impossible for her to escape easily. I never lost sight of her. The mother-in-law seemed to be heading toward her car. I followed her. Just as the car came into view, she noticed something was wrong. She exclaimed, "What is this?" with a terrified expression. To our surprise, the rear window had been shattered, and shards of glass were scattered on the ground. Accusingly, she turned to me and grabbed my collar. "You did this," she accused. I stood my ground, my anger matching hers. "It wasn't me," I retorted. "If it wasn't you, then who would do such a thing? Stop making excuses and compensate immediately," she demanded. Frustrated, I shot back. "In this scorching heat, leaving young Emma alone in the car while you went somewhere, aren't you the one at fault?" I continued. "Do you not know about the news of children left in cars who tragically lost their lives?" My boldness surprised her. I usually behave modestly. As we argued, bystanders gathered, observing our heated exchange. Realizing she was being watched, she hurriedly got into her car. "Remember this. You'll definitely pay for this," she declared before speeding away. The window glass fell to the ground in a cascade. "This is dangerous," I thought. Just then, a police officer stopped her car. Out of breath, the officer seemed to have sprinted here. My mother-in-law's expression froze, her earlier determination vanished. She followed the officer's instructions, parking the car in the designated spot. As she stepped out, several officers escorted her away. "Emma and her mother, please come with us," the officer instructed. We followed, wondering what would happen next. Until a moment ago, my daughter was sitting in the pipe chair, but now my mother-in-law is sitting there. My daughter seems completely at ease, still asleep in my arms. "Why did you leave your granddaughter in the car?" One of the police officers calmly and sternly questions my mother-in-law. "Never mind that. My car window was broken. If you're the police, catch the culprit. It's probably this woman's doing," my mother-in-law retorts defiantly, pointing at me and glaring at the officer. "No, that's not true. Emma's mother didn't break the window. Another customer noticed that she was left inside the car and broke the window to rescue her." Huh? As the police officer explains, my mother-in-law looks surprised, mouth agape. When a couple was getting out of the car to go shopping, they heard Emma crying. They worked together to break the window and rescue Emma. Afterward, they promptly reported it to us. The officer continues to explain about the person who broke the car window. They also mentioned that Emma's body temperature was still relatively normal, considering the time she was left behind. Thanks to that, we were able to respond quickly. We found her mother's contact information from Emma's belongings and immediately reached out to you. Hearing this, tears welled up in my eyes. If those people hadn't noticed Emma, what would have happened to her? But my mother-in-law remains unyielding. I often go shopping alone, you know? So, I just forgot that I had Emma with me. With a feigned expression, my mother-in-law continues. As soon as I realized Emma wasn't there, I tried to go back to the car. But then this woman was holding Emma, and to top it off, my car window was broken. I naturally assumed it was her doing. The police respond to my mother-in-law's blatant lies. Ma'am, please stop lying. There's evidence on the dashcam. When you got out of the car, you spoke to your granddaughter, then closed the curtain and hid the rear seat. It's all recorded. My mother-in-law's expression momentarily darkens. Why are you watching that kind of thing? It's an invasion of privacy. Just because you're the police doesn't mean you can get away with it. She slams her hand on the table. The loud noise wakes up my daughter, so I step out for a moment. Even through the thick walls, I can still hear my mother-in-law's shouting. According to the police, the dashcam even recorded my mother-in-law leaning toward the sleeping daughter, saying, "Sleep well, Emma." Given the decisive evidence that remains, it's unlikely that my mother-in-law will escape guilt. After being questioned by the police for a while, my mother-in-law finally reached her limit. It's because that woman gave birth to a girl. We need a boy in our family. She finally confessed the reason for leaving our daughter behind in the car. At that time, we were already back home, so I heard this story later from the police. My shock was immense upon hearing my mother-in-law's true feelings toward our daughter. If I had been there, I might have confronted her without caring about the onlookers. Unfortunately, the chance for revenge against my mother-in-law never came. Why? Because right after that statement, she was taken into custody by the police. She was charged with child abandonment, and her prison sentence was decided. Even now, with the conviction, my mother-in-law stubbornly refuses to go to prison. But unless she changes her feelings toward our daughter, we won't cross paths after she serves her sentence. When I informed my husband, he and my father-in-law both expressed the same opinion. My father-in-law hired a lawyer and presented my mother-in-law with divorce papers. My husband, furious that our daughter had been endangered, declared a complete estrangement from his mother. Left to her own devices after being pushed away by my husband and father-in-law, my mother-in-law wrote letters to all our relatives, pleading for help. But given the gravity of her crime, no one extended a helping hand. After her release, she'll likely spend the rest of her life alone. News of the incident caused quite a stir in the neighborhood, prompting us to decide to move. My father-in-law said, "My wife did something terrible. I apologize for burdening you." He covered the moving expenses from his savings. Meanwhile, my father-in-law sold the house he had lived in for years and decided to live alone near us. My father-in-law said, "Life is just beginning, and I'll enjoy a peaceful, solitary existence." His face seemed somewhat relieved. 6 months after moving, we settled into our new home. It was during this time that we discovered I was pregnant with our second child. Freed from my mother-in-law's harassment, we could finally lead a calm life. And the gender of our second child? A boy. But for my husband and me, the child's gender doesn't matter. Our daughter, observing my growing belly, eagerly anticipates having a little brother. She says, "As I'm going to be a big sister soon, I'll help Mom." Her enthusiasm warms my heart. Our nearby father-in-law is also eagerly awaiting the birth of our second child. Knowing he'll continue to care for our children gives us great comfort. From now on, as a family of 4, along with my father-in-law, we hope to lead a happy and peaceful life.